everyone, my name is Aria Rahman, and I'll be your host for this episode of the English podcast. A little background about me: I'm an economics major with minors in behavioral decision sciences and professional and technical writing. I'm an avid consumer of fictional media and enjoy delving into the original sources as well as their real-world impacts. Today, we're diving into a question that sparks a lot of debate in both literary and online communities, and that question is: should fanfiction be considered literature? If you've spent any time in fandom spaces, you've probably encountered fanfiction before. For those who are unfamiliar, fanfiction refers to stories written by fans that use characters, worlds, or ideas from pre-existing works. These include all forms of media, from books and movies to TV shows and video games. These stories are usually shared on online platforms such as Archive of Our Own, Wattpad, or fanfiction.net, where readers and writers can read and share fan-made stories about the works they've grown to love. Fanfiction has existed in some form for decades, but the internet has allowed it to grow into a massive creative community with millions of writers and readers worldwide. Despite its popularity, though, fanfiction is still dismissed by critics or viewed as something less serious than traditionally published literature. So today, we're going to explore both sides of this debate. Why do some people believe fanfiction isn't real literature? And why do others argue that it deserves to be considered as such? Let's start with some common arguments against fanfiction being literature. One of the biggest criticisms is that fanfiction relies on pre-existing characters and worlds. Instead of creating entirely original settings or protagonists, fanfiction writers build off of stories that already exist. Because of this, some critics argue that fanfiction lacks originality compared to traditional novels or short stories. For example, literary critic Harold Bloom famously emphasized the importance of originality and the canon in literature, basically prioritizing works that introduce something new and influential. From that perspective, fanfiction doesn't really qualify. Another argument is that fanfiction is often associated with amateur writing. Many fanfiction authors write purely for fun rather than for publication or profit, and their work is rarely professionally edited or published through traditional channels. Because of this, some people see fanfiction as more of a hobby or a casual creative activity rather than a serious literary form. There's also the idea that literature should involve creating something entirely new characters, new worlds, and new narratives. From that perspective, fanfiction might seem more like an extension of someone else's work rather than an original contribution to literature. But there's also a strong argument in favor of fanfiction being a legitimate form of literature. First, while fanfiction uses existing characters or settings, it often involves some form of creative reinterpretation. Writers might explore alternative storylines, develop underexplored characters, or imagine entirely new scenarios that the original work never addressed. In many cases, fanfiction expands the possibilities of the original narrative rather than simply copying it. Second, writing fanfiction still requires the same amount of storytelling skills as writing any other piece of fiction. Authors need to understand aspects like character development, pacing, dialogue, narrative structure, and emotional impact. Many fanfiction writers spend hours and sometimes even months or years developing complex stories that tend to rival the length and depth of published novels. Another important point is that fanfiction actually fits into a much longer literary tradition of retelling stories. Take William Shakespeare, for example. Many of his plays aren't entirely original. The plot of Romeo and Juliet actually traces back to an Italian novella by Matteo Bandello. This novella was adapted into English verse by Arthur Brooke in the Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, and later appeared in prose through William Painter in The Palace of Pleasure, before finally inspiring the tragic romance that I'm sure all you English majors are familiar with, Romeo and Juliet. Beyond Shakespeare, literature is full of retellings: Greek myths, fairy tales, modern adaptations, all of which reuse and adapt the original source material into stories that translate well into the present. In many ways, fanfiction continues this long tradition of storytelling through reinterpretation. Now that we have both sides of the argument, where does that leave us? What's the definitive answer to the question? Ultimately, whether fanfiction is considered literature may depend on how you personally define literature in itself. If you believe that literature must always be completely original and professionally published, then fanfiction might not fit your definition. But if you believe that literature is about storytelling, creativity, and meaningful engagement with narratives, then fanfiction may deserve a place within that broader literary landscape. So maybe the real question isn't just whether or not fanfiction counts as literature, but how do we decide what literature is in the first place? Perhaps we should be asking ourselves that question first, before we can explore the realm of possibilities. Once again, I'm Aria Rahman, and thank you so much for tuning in.